Yeah, that's right. We've heard episodic gunfire and also multiple blasts. Now, it's not entirely clear what those were, but some of them have been quite powerful, rattling our windows here, for example. Some suggestion that most of those blasts throughout the evening were American forces carrying out controlled explosions, destroying equipment as they prepare to leave Afghanistan. But either way, it's adding to a sense of anxiety here after this awful attack. At least 60 people have now said to have been killed. That death toll is most likely, unfortunately, going to rise throughout the night. And amidst all the uncertainty about the prospect of life under Taliban rule, what that would look like, what kind of rules would be imposed, many people here, I think, were clinging to the hope that at least, perhaps, life would be more peaceful, but that because the Taliban have been the main perpetrators of the violence, that at least there'd be an end to the suicide bombings, to the rocket attacks. But these blasts carried out by IS are really, I think, a reminder to people here that even if the war between the Afghan government and the Taliban is over, that with groups like IS still operating here, still able to carry out these kind of awful attacks, that there's a risk of further bloodshed. IS is much less powerful than the Taliban. The Taliban have fought against them in the past, pushed them out of strongholds they had established in the east of the country a few years ago, but they retain this ability to carry out these devastating attacks, and they've done so repeatedly in Kabul.
Now, we've heard reports today that the gates to the airport have been sealed against possible attempts to carry out further bombings. We don't know whether they might be reopened tomorrow, but what are the people who've been waiting in that heat outside, who've survived the blast today, what are they going to do you think?
Well, look, Mark, many of those people, I would say the majority of those people, do not have the right travel documents to board any of those evacuation flights. So they would have been left behind anyway. They've just turned up clutching any kind of document that they can find, proving that they've had some link with a foreign charity, a foreign embassy, international troops, and hoping that that would be enough to get them inside the airport. Of course, unfortunately for them, that's not the case. So those people will remain desperate. I think they'll still be looking for a way out of the country, as will those people who do have the right permissions to leave the country but have been unable to get past the crowds and negotiate the kind of chaotic scenes that we've seen there. The most obvious place for many of these people to go, at least in the short term, would be across the border to Pakistan, where millions of Afghan refugees have been living for years. But particularly for those Afghans who are affiliated with the previous government, they're very nervous about doing that because they see Pakistan as hand in glove with the Taliban. Of course, Pakistan denies that, but that's the perception that people have here. The other thing that I think we're likely to see is a real rise in people trying to find illegal routes out of the country. Already a couple of weeks back, I'd been looking into social media groups where Afghans were inundating people smugglers operating in Iran and Pakistan, taking people to Turkey, inundating them with requests. And I think we're likely to see much more of that. Many people trying to get all the way to Europe too, eventually.
Secunder, thank you very much and stay safe. Today began with explicit warnings of an attack at the airport, and David Grossman has been looking at what's happened as the day unfolded and what it might mean.
If anyone heard the UK and US government pleas to stay away from the airport, it certainly wasn't clear from the pictures earlier today. The crowd seemed as dense as ever, if anything, more desperate.
I was working with Canadians who have given me documents and invited me to come here. They've issued me visas. It's what they promised me. When I came here, I found the situation to be very bad.
This morning, the Prime Minister visited Northwood headquarters, where troops coordinate the UK's Kabul evacuation. As bad as the situation was in Kabul, it was about to turn markedly worse. These pictures of the bloody aftermath too graphic to show. The BBC has been told 60 were dead, 140 wounded. Among the injured, the strongest and the weakest, US troops and little children, the wounded ferried to hospital in wheelbarrows.
I saw at least 400 or 500 people there. The explosion was really powerful. Half were hurled into the water, others on the ground outside. We carried the wounded here on stretchers. And here, my clothes are really blooded.
Meanwhile, the flights continued for now with renewed urgency. The lucky passengers of this plane could see the plume of smoke from the bombs and how narrow their escape had been. The two explosions took place at the south side of the airport, one at Abbey Gate, the softest of targets, crowded with desperate civilians trying to enter the airport. The second a short distance away, near the Baron Hotel, previously used by Western nations, including Britain, for processing evacuees.
Well, I've just chaired a COBRA, and the conclusion is that we're able to continue with the programme in the way that we've been running it according to the timetable that we've got, and that's what we're going to do.
In Washington, the Pentagon confirmed 12 US service personnel had died, another 15 injured. Via a video link, the commander of US forces in the region was asked if he thought that the Taliban had let the attack happen.
So as to whether or not they let it happen, I don't know. I don't think there's anything to convince me that they let it happen. As to whether or not I trust them, that's not necessarily that's a word I use very carefully. You've heard me say before, it's not what they say, it's what they do. They have a practical reason for wanting us to get out of here by the 31st of August, and that's that they want to reclaim the airfield. We want to get out by that day too, if it's going to be possible to do so. So we share a common purpose. As long as we've kept that common purpose aligned, they've been useful to work with.
Meanwhile, for the lucky few, there is safety. We asked to speak to a UK defence minister, but were told none was available. The MOD did, however, release these pictures, showing a more positive image of new arrivals from Afghanistan at RAF Bryce Norton. But in Kabul, it's a far bleaker picture. With many countries having already put a lid on their evacuation programmes and left, the question is, how much longer can the UK and US remain?
David Grossman there. Well, we're joined now by the former Chief of Defence Staff, General Lord David Richards, from Washington by Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild, and in the studio by Colonel Ash Alexander Cooper, who served 8 tours in Afghanistan, including with special mission units. Welcome to you all. If we can just start with you, Colonel. I mean, in the mind of that commander there tonight on the ground, there must be all kinds of considerations. It must be one of the most complex types of mission imaginable. What will be playing on his or her thoughts?
He'll certainly be concerned about the very real threat of follow-on attacks. I mean, we've seen from evidence today that this is the modus operandi of ISIS-K, as it is with Taliban and Haqqani as well. But he'll also be laser focused on continuing the evacuation of those vulnerable Afghans that are under the UK's control, and he'll be trying to do that as safely as possible.
Now, what about as the troop numbers start to shrink? Because presumably the ability to actually secure the perimeter of the airfield will go at a certain point, and you'll be down to a very small footprint. That must be a very dangerous moment.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the fewer troops you have on the ground, the risk does go up. There will be a commensurate increase in risk. But let's remember who we've sent there. These are the most combat-ready and highest readiness troops we have. And knowing the leaders and commanders at all levels of those units, they are some of the most capable and experienced combat leaders we have. So once if Afghans have been evacuated, then they will be standing ready to do what is necessary to get out in good order.
And the attacks today by this splinter group, Al-Qaeda splinter group, ISIS-K, condemned by the Taliban. I mean, should we take that at face value? What do you make of that?
I mean, the attacks and the images are clearly sickening for everybody to watch with any sense of decency. I found it hard to listen to them condemn the very type of attack that they have conducted themselves for so many years. This is absolutely what Haqqani network and the Taliban have done, and maimed and killed thousands of Afghans over the years. So to hear them condemn, those words ring a bit hollow for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Stay with us. Congresswoman Wild, if we can come to you now. The President was speaking just as we came on air. I hope you had a chance to hear it. Do you think he got the tone right on what's obviously been a very, very difficult day for the US?
I think it's almost impossible to get the tone right for this kind of day. I think he did the best he could under very difficult circumstances. I'm sure the president is very emotional, as all of us are. And it's just an absolutely gutting, tragic day for us. So my heart goes out to every every service member who is in Afghanistan right now, those who have lost their lives, and those family members who are waiting with trepidation to hear the status of their service member. I have at least one known service member on the ground from my district, and I'm trying to find out his status right now.
The president said that they will develop plans to strike back, to strike key assets of this group, ISIS-K. Does that mean then it's not an end to military operations in Afghanistan, that you will be involved now in running counter-terrorist operations there?
Well, sadly, it's not an end now that this has happened. Hopefully, not hopefully, those will be very advanced technological operations that I hope will result in a minimum of loss of life and certainly no American lives lost in the process. But we have no choice now that this has happened.
General Lord Richards, if I can bring you in, Congresswoman just said no choice about striking back, but no choice also but to put a great deal of trust in the Taliban. We heard that from the Pentagon briefing tonight, that a lot of information has been given to them, including names of people who might be trying to get through to the airport. Are they viable as partners for security now as the new rulers of Afghanistan?
Well, in the short term, sadly, we have no alternative. You know, it makes me very angry now. I've been very sad to see what's happening. Now I'm getting very angry at the stupidity of the decision-making and lack of statecraft that has led to this awful situation in Kabul and particularly at the airport. But the fact is that if you were writing a staff college exercise, this would be too horrendous a scenario for the authors to put into it. There cannot be a worse non-combatant evacuation environment than what we see unfolding in front of us. We are entirely beholden to the Taliban. If we aggravate the Taliban, the risk is that we have a shootout in a perimeter that is very small by conventional standards, and the allied forces, mainly American and British, are entirely at the mercy of those people, and then perhaps joined by ISIS-K to add insult to injury. So we're stuck where we are because of the way we have got ourselves into this position.
Well, that presumably is your president's work, Susan Wild. I mean, General Richards is a former commander of NATO forces in Afghanistan, and he's talking about a catastrophic failure of statecraft.
He is, and there are going to be a lot of questions about this. I have questions. Everybody on the House Foreign Affairs Committee has questions. I'm a member of that committee, and we will not let this go. Right now is not the time to ask those questions because we have to deal with the imminent situation at hand. But Congress has a very broad power of oversight, and we will be asking the very, very difficult questions of this administration about strategy or lack thereof, failure to listen to intelligence sources, whether the intelligence sources were adequate, and I've been told that they were. So I have a great number of questions. I'm not prepared to cast judgment at this time, but I will be at some point in the future after the event is over and once we have conducted extensive hearings on this entire situation.
General Richards, can I come back at the beginning of your first answer? You talked about having no choice but to go with the Taliban in the short term to ensure the security of this evacuation. What about the longer term? I mean, thousands of people have been released from jails. A lot of blood was spilt getting some of those people behind bars, people who carried out acts of terrorism, members of Al-Qaeda. What's the regional security picture going to look like, do you think, over the coming months? Is it just going to be back to square one in terms of Afghanistan as a focus for militant groups?
Well, there's a huge risk of that. And of course, I and other pundits have been talking about the ungoverned space that will open up inevitably as a result of the Taliban success. And we're now already seeing that. It's Kabul airport today, London, Washington, Paris tomorrow, unless we're very careful. My view is that we have no option, not only in the short term, but with our eyes wide open, as I've said before, but to deal with the Taliban. They clearly have fallen out with ISIS-K. We've seen ISIS-K denounce the Taliban recently. There's a record of that going back a number of years. And we need to test them out. And if we can, although it'll stick in a lot of people's gullets, we need to see whether or not we can trust them and work with them, incentivize them. Lots of carrots, which might be difficult, but some very big sticks too if they get this wrong. And I think there is a route through that. At least we have no option but to give it a go.
Right. And in that scenario, Susan Wild, what do you say to people, particularly on the Republican side of the House, who say that what's happened will serve as an inspiration for jihadists the world over, that it'll rekindle the flames of that kind of militant Islamist violence?
I'm very concerned about that as well. It's obviously that's one of my chief concerns right now. We have allowing ISIS to take back a position of control and power is very, very alarming. It's something we are going to have to step up all of our homeland security, and it's something that I'm tremendously concerned about as well. I don't think that's just a Republican point of view.
Thank you. Just one last question to Colonel Alexander Cooper. I'm just wondering about the people who are on the resettlement, the people in a sense you personally care most about. Do you think the vast majority of them are out now?
There are a large number that I'm aware of that I used to work with who are out, but there are still a number who have not made it in safely into the handling facility for evacuation. And now, clearly, with the situation on the ground, it's going to be nigh on impossible for them to get in because I believe the gates are shut. So I believe we will be leaving people behind, unfortunately, and that's tragic.
Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Alexander Cooper, Lord Richards and Congresswoman Wild. Thank you for joining us.